Howdy again, folks. I've come back to this site in Western Sydney at a location called Hammondville, where I made a video on a tree called Blue Box, Eucalyptus boweriana. That's one just growing over that way. And I've come back here because there's a great range of, what I'd call Western Sydney trees, but they certainly go a lot further afield than that. It's a sort of a set of trees that get right out. They punch right out into the middle of New South Wales. And they also go up and down the eastern side of Australia anyway, up into Queensland and down into Victoria. And again, we're on these floodplains of the Georges River, what some people call these alluvial terraces in geological terms, and that's probably a good sort of word for it. I'm in a modified parkland, but in these parts of Western Sydney, we've got plenty of remnant eucalypt trees making up the parkland or persisting in the parkland. They've just been retained and now they might be surrounded by mowed ground layer. There's plenty of picnic space out this way on the floodplains of the Georges River. And in this copse of, or this patch of mixed age trees, I don't think I've done this particular guy yet. And that's Angophora floribunda. And I just don't think I've made a video on this one as yet. I think when I was here last time, I might not have been able to get fertile material. But I've made a video on Angophora bakeri, and I don't think this guy is all that different. He's pretty similar, but it's got a much bigger geographic range compared to Angophora bakeri. The best place to start is it's got fatter leaves. It's got much fatter leaves than Angophora bakeri. It's a much bigger tree, and it's got a much bigger geographic range. Here is a big one going up there to the top. I don't know if we've had a fire in here recently. It's possible. A lot of these Angophoras have got blackened trunks. You'd have to think there has been a fire. So it's not typical for them to have this blackened trunk, but it's sort of tessellated. It's almost coming across as an iron bark, but you can pull bits of it off. But it does look a little bit iron barky. It's very spongy in places. And with our Angophoras, we've got sort of a contorted, twisted branching habit or an undulating branching habit. And this one gets called the rough-barked apple, Angophora floribunda. They can easily hit about, I've seen them at about 25 metres. You don't tend to get them much bigger than that, but some people might have seen bigger ones. They go, in New South Wales, they go right out to Dubbo and Moree. You get them right out in, just getting tangled in vine here. You get them right out definitely into the Western Plains of New South Wales, but that's where they about peter out. And they'll happily punch into Queensland and Victoria. What I tell people about when you get a patch of Angophora floribunda, and let's say it's been disturbed or it's on a farm, it might be in a creek line that's been allowed to regenerate, it might be in an urban park where it's been allowed to regenerate now over the last, say, 20, 30 years or so, and there's not so much clearing going on. You'll get plenty of saplings and seedlings. You'll get heaps. I just find Angophora floribunda, it puts on plenty of seedlings and saplings. So here's a sapling here. It might be a good place to start with the leaves. And then I'll try and get some fertile material. Angophora, so we've got opposite leaves. We should be retaining opposite leaves in pairs, and hopefully you can see that there. And look, I don't have a very good representative sample here, but if you go up and down the stem, you should be retaining opposite leaves. Some of these have got sort of sessile bases, which is sort of making it look like a bit like Angophora subvelutina, but I don't think subvelutina is here. That's a very similar Angophora. I'll have to do a video on that at some stage. But these are sort of probably in the juvenile phase, and we've got to get hold of some adult foliage. The leaves are papery thin. They are absolutely papery thin. No risk about that. And I'm pretty sure they're strongly discolorous. Yeah, they've got a good hint of discoloration there. What helps? Sunshade. Just got another leaf in the way there. Hopefully you can see that. Very discolorous. And what I like about Angophora floribunda, I mean, some other plants throw this as well. I guess like Angophora costata and maybe Corymbia gomifera as well, but it's got that really fine venation on the back. And I always look for that really fine venation. In Angophora costata and Corymbia gomifera has got it as well, but Angophora floribunda has it too. It's this beautiful fine reticulate venation with those, you know, parallel lateral veins coming out at very wide angles to the mid vein with all that net venation in between. It's a pretty cool feature. It always has it. So I just use that. Very thin textured. I'm trying to give you a better example of the bark because these guys are, yeah, obviously been burnt, but that's a much better example. It tends to look like that. So it does come across as an iron bark, and sometimes if they're growing with iron barks, you got to pay attention. You got to make sure it's not something like maybe Eucalyptus paniculata, but that's very spongy. It's got a very spongy feel to it, and they do have a bit of an iron bark appearance, but just slightly different. Maybe not as furrowed, not as hard, spongy. Not as rough and coarse as an iron bark. It's sort of more of a sort of spongy, corky sort of texture to it. This one is a sapling as well. It's got, when they're a bit younger, they just tend to have a bit sort of maybe smaller chunks. Tessellated still. This one's been losing a bit anyway, I think. So that's what you got to watch for. They are a tree I find you can pick up from the road when you're driving. You can sort of, if you're in rural parts of New South Wales, you tend to be able to tell Angophora floribunda after a while at the side of the road. I'll just look at this. This is adult foliage. There's no reason why you'd say it isn't. And just check the opposite pairing, or maybe just ever so slightly sub-opposite. So you can see that there as well. Just, they should be retaining their opposite leaves, maybe slightly sub-opposite. They shouldn't be getting truly alternate, but as you can see, they just go ever so slightly sub-opposite a lot of the time. So it's just throwing us a little bit. And I know you might start to say, well, this is alternate leaves, Dan, but it's not very alternate, and it's not representatively alternate. Not well spaced out like something like Corymbia gomifera or something like that. So they are described as opposite to sub-opposite. Very thin, very papery, and they're not different to the juveniles all that much. And they got a good dash of discoloration. Very strongly so. Might be, yeah, they might be better for that. Strongly discolorous. So just look for that with Angophora floribunda. I'm just going to get hold of some fruits and I'll see if there's some buds. Sometimes there is. You can get hold of some buds, and you can clearly see with the buds why they're not a eucalyptus. So I'll just see what I can find. I did just look into when the distribution of Angophora floribunda goes south in New South Wales, sort of, it goes out to Dubbo in the sort of central parts, and then it comes down sort of east of Orange, and it cuts right down to the south coast of New South Wales. And when it goes south, it just sticks to the south coast. So it's sort of a thing where as you go south and it gets colder, it just sticks to that south coast area, and then it just gets into the eastern parts of Victoria. just into that eastern, I guess maybe Gippsland area of Victoria, or even the further sort of eastern sort of corner. In Queensland, it punches right up into the middle there, and it goes to about west of Rockhampton. So that's how far this baby goes. It's got a nice wide spread. And I've seen it on plenty of, sort of rural farmland creek lines. It just doesn't have to be on the creek line, but it usually is, or the valleys of the creek lines. Angophora floribunda can rock up in a hell of a lot of different vegetation types and soil types, sandstone, alluvium, shale. It can rock up, and it's sort of, the other day I got it in like a rainforest creek in a sandstone gully in northwestern Sydney. It can rock up absolutely anywhere. It's one of those really versatile plants. Here's the fruits. So I haven't got the buds yet, but I've got the fruits, and they're not very different to Angophora bakeri. They're not very different at all. Ribbed, terminal. Some of these, they're a bit crusty. They're a bit past their best, I would think, but they're hanging here on the tree. And all you need is a few of these to confirm your identification. You just want to confirm them. Confirm your ID. Just look for these. They're produced pretty regularly and pretty reliably. Not like the Eucalyptus squamosa I just filmed. These are really generous. You get a lot of them. You tend to get a lot on the ground. Maybe a bit like sort of Eucalyptus botryoides or piperita. They're like that. They drop a lot of fruit. And like I showed with Angophora bakeri, if I just grab some, and I know these might be past their best, just let me zoom in here. You can, they're not overly woody and they're a little bit cardboardy, and you can crush them up. You can crush them. When you want to exercise your wrist strength or your finger strength, you can crush them up. I'm crushing these and just squashing them. So they've got a bit of a cardboard texture. It's a bit sort of on the cardboard side, but I mean they're well and truly woody, but there's no problem. Just some of them are harder, maybe when they're more fresh. But I'm just flattening this guy, just pushing it from side to side. They're sort of easily squashable. Now, we've always got to talk about maybe potential misidentification. You should be right with this guy. You should be right with Angophora floribunda, but you might get Angophora bakeri intergrades where the leaves are getting a bit narrow and you're a bit worried. You can get Angophora bakeri around here, but we've got some Castlereagh scribbly gum woodland communities, and that's where the bakeri will be. I think it's meant to have leaves to about 1 centimetre wide, maybe 15 mil at the most. These guys, looking with my naked eye, they're well and surely over 20 mil. They can probably get to 30 mil wide, something like that. And then in the sort of, more western parts of Sydney associated with the Hawkesbury Nepean on big alluvial floodplains, and it's elsewhere as well. Actually, I've seen trees not too far from here, so probably associated with Georges River floodplains as well. You get Angophora subvelutina. Subvelutina has really sessile leaves. It has no petiole, or I believe the petiole is allowed to be about 5 mil long or something like that. But mainly when you look at the canopy of subvelutina, the leaves are sessile. And you can see these aren't doing that at all. These are clearly petiolate. I think there's some differences with the fruits as well, with subvelutina and Angophora floribunda, but the trunks are the same. The trunks are really similar. I've got a patch of Angophora subvelutina down on the Nepean at a place called Spring Farm, and when you look at the canopy, you can see it's very different. It's got that sort of sessile leaved canopy. So I find Angophora floribunda not too hard, a quite easy one to identify. Remember, only 10 species or maybe up to 13 species of Angophora Australia-wide. This is a good one to get familiar with. It's got the widest range. It's got the widest range of any Angophora. No bud material for Angophora floribunda. It's just the wrong time of year. I remember collecting them about in September last year, and they had a heap of bud material. Now they're all in fruit in this early autumn period here. But here's a nice big one. This is what they do on the floodplains of Western Sydney. Beautiful twisting branch habit. And you might look at it for a while and go, oh, what sort of tree is that? But just look at the edge of the very branches and you'll start to see the fruits. You'll start to see the Angophora fruits at the end. And if you just try and observe everything you can, the fruits at the end will lead you right. So just a low branch like that, and you see the fruit. You just see the fruit clusters at the end. That's what I'm always looking for Angophora floribunda. So I'm sorry I can't give you any bud material. The buds are really cool to look at. But I haven't done Angophora costata yet, so when I do that, we'll try and have a good look at the flower buds. Alrighty, that's a beautiful Angophora. I'll just point out to you that if you go into this patch of bushland, I've got an ecological monitoring plot. There's just hundreds of saplings of Angophora floribunda, and that's what they can do. There's a bit of regrowth here. It's a beautiful patch of what we call river flat forest in Sydney and in New South Wales generally. River flat forests on coastal floodplains. And quite beautiful. This has been allowed to regenerate. There's a bit of a conservation project and controlled fire going on in here. And yeah, this is a whole copse of Angophora floribunda. Mixed stage trees, and I guess they're all competing with each other. It's happened naturally, and again, it just reflects that ability to put out a ton of seedlings like that. So they're all just competing with one another. Makes for a beautiful sort of sheltered forest, but it doesn't take you too long to figure out, what they are. Just with the trunks, the opposite leaves, and this is what Angophora floribunda can do all through its natural range.